Speaker, no quorum.
Proceedings are resumed. Can we have a quorum in the chamber, please? Proceedings are resumed. I recognize the Honourable Minister responsible for financial services.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much. Madam Speaker, when we took the break, we'd had several questions posed by the member from Northside in relation to the presentation on the Foundation Companies Bill. And certainly happy, Madam Speaker, to respond on those questions as I understood them. And I have no doubt that if he thinks that I am not addressing any aspect, or if I misunderstood what he was saying, he will clarify it. Madam Speaker, I think his first question was on the concept of a foundation and whether that is, or foundation company, and whether that is similar to foundations which are, or structures which are sort of generically referred to as foundations in the context of charities, as well as whether they could be easily converted to a foundation company. Madam Speaker, normally, when we, at least on this side of the world, when we talk about foundations in a generic sense, those are typically in the form of trusts, or, and more specifically, usually charitable trusts. So when we talk about a charitable trust or a foundation in the context of, for example, special purpose vehicles that are wound up and the residual assets go into what may be referred to generically as a foundation to be distributed to charitable beneficiaries, that is usually in the form of a trust. And of course, Madam Speaker, here we're talking about, in this bill, we're talking about a company, and there's no mechanism to sort of re-register a trust, Madam Speaker, as a foundation company. It is, however, Madam Speaker, probably not inconceivable that a company could be structured in a way that it could be a part of this sort of generically described foundation class of charitable trust. And if that were the case, Madam Speaker, under Clause 5.2, there is a provision which allows a company to effectively register as a foundation company, to become a foundation company, provided that it complies with the foundation company requirements which are set out in Clause 4 to the bill, Madam Speaker. And just for clarity, Clause 4.1 says, for a company to be a foundation company, the requirements are that, and those are described as, or defined as foundation company requirements. A, it is limited by shares or by guarantee, with or without share capital. B, it has a memorandum that, one, states that the company is a foundation company. Two, generally or specifically describes its objects, which may but need not be beneficial to other persons. Three, provides directly or by reference to its articles for the disposal of any surplus assets the company may have on winding up. And four, prohibits dividends or other distributions of profits or assets to its members or proposed members as such. And C, it has adopted articles, and D, its secretary is a qualified person. And I spoke in the presentation, Madam Speaker, about a qualified person, which is effectively a licensee under the Companies Management Law, 2003 revision. So, Madam Speaker, the answer is yes. If we were talking about a company, it could actually re-register, provided it satisfies all of the foundation company requirements as a foundation company, and could get a new certificate of incorporation issued by the registrar, which states or contains a declaration that the company is now a foundation company. Madam Speaker, I think the other question, or another question raised by the member from Northside, was in respect of the memorandum and articles of association, and why, if there was a form of memorandum and articles included in the bill in Part 2 of Schedule 1, why there would be flexibility in the company being able to, in Clause 6, adopt all or any part, or sorry, adopt any part of or all of the model forms in Schedule 2. And Madam Speaker, the simple answer to that is that the model forms which are attached in the schedule are simply indicative of the types of provisions that could be rationally included. But as I indicated in the presentation, Madam Speaker, this vehicle, this type of company, is designed to have the greatest flexibility that can be achieved within reason. So that's why it provides that while there is a scheduled form of memorandum and articles of association, the actual constitution of the company, the foundation company, could reflect some or all or none of those provisions. Madam Speaker. Again, on the basis that there is significant flexibility contemplated by this bill. Madam Speaker, I think if I'm not wrong, I think the third question was on the issue of a beneficiary and what sort of rights they have. And I think the member was specifically referring to, the member from Northside was specifically referring to clause 7.4E. And E, Madam Speaker, refers to a beneficiary of the foundation company has no powers or rights relating to the foundation company, its management, or its assets, and is not an interested person. I think his concern, Madam Speaker, was that if the beneficiary has no rights, then how do they complain if they wish to? Madam Speaker, again, this structure and the contents of the bill are designed to give maximum flexibility to the structure. In other jurisdictions, Madam Speaker, beneficiaries are given the right to go to court if there is an issue that they would wish to have resolved. Madam Speaker, I think the consideration was certainly given to that, but in those scenarios, Madam Speaker, particularly if you have beneficiaries from tax jurisdictions, that right gives rise to a very specific tax consequence for that beneficiary, Madam Speaker. So there are other mechanisms in the bill which seek to address scenarios where there's some sort of dispute. And Madam Speaker, Clause 11 deals specifically with dispute resolution. And let me say, before I go on to that, Madam Speaker, let me back up slightly. In relation to subclause 7.4, again, E of 7.4 is what I read earlier in relation to the beneficiary of foundation company. But 7.4 specifically states, Madam Speaker, except as otherwise expressly provided by the Constitution. So, Madam Speaker, again, in the vein of having the greatest degree of flexibility available to that particular founder of this company who wishes to create something which survives beyond him potentially, he could give beneficiaries a specific right and interest under the Constitution. So the Constitution could very clearly specify what the beneficiary's rights are. And in default of that, there is, the provision in E, which I read earlier, which indicates that the beneficiary has no specific rights. So, Madam Speaker, in relation to Clause 11, there is certainly the ability to address disputes, and to the extent beneficiaries are specifically identified as having rights, then they can participate in the dispute resolution process. Otherwise, Madam Speaker, if they have no rights, then it is essentially up to the directors and or supervisor of a foundation company. And a supervisor, Madam Speaker, is defined as, for a foundation company, means a person other than a member who, under the foundation company's constitution, has a right to attend and vote at general meetings, whether or not the person has supervisory powers or duties. Again, the idea is to create significant flexibility so that the provisions, the rights of directors, directors, supervisors, and beneficiaries can be specified in whatever way or to whatever extent the founder of the company wishes to convey, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there's also provisions dealing in Clause 9 and Clause 10 with the ability to alter memorandum and the memorandum and articles of association. And these are subject, Madam Speaker, to also the ability under Part 5 of the law, which deals with the Grand Court's functions, for the Grand Court to get involved where there is what is defined in Clause 18 as a difficulty. And the Grand Court can then consider what power or what order they can make to resolve the difficulty if there is no power in the Constitution that can be inserted. Or indeed, Madam Speaker, if there is a power and that power has not been appropriately exercised, then the court has the ability to step in and address that. Ultimately, Madam Speaker, the court can alter the Constitution in a way it considers appropriate to resolve the difficulty in accordance with the general intent of the foundation company, or, Madam Speaker, if the court considers the difficulty cannot be so resolved, or that the general intent cannot be sufficiently found from admissible evidence as a matter of probability, the court can make a winding up order for the foundation company and effectively bring it to an end. So, Madam Speaker, I hope that explanation or those responses to the questions raised by the member from Northside sufficiently addresses his questions. And with that, Madam Speaker, I wish to thank all other members of the House for their support, and I would ask that this bill, the Foundation Companies Bill 2016, be passed in this honourable House. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Foundation Companies Bill 2016 be given a second reading. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, no. The ayes have it. The Foundation Companies Bill 2016 has been given its second reading.
The Development Bank Amendment Bill 2016.
Recognise the Honourable Minister responsible for financial services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I beg to move the second reading of a bill shortly entitled the Development Bank Amendment Bill 2016.
The bill has been duly moved. Does the Honourable Minister wish to speak thereto?
Yes, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much. I will briefly speak to the bill. Madam Speaker, this bill seeks to legislate simple but necessary amendments and changes to the law relating to the Cayman Islands Development Bank. Specifically, Madam Speaker, it seeks to amend Section 4.2 and the first schedule of the Development Bank Law 2004 revision to firstly include the appointment of the chief officer or his designate of the ministry with responsibility for the bank as an ex officio non-voting member of the board of directors. Secondly, Madam Speaker, it seeks to include the appointment of the financial secretary or his designate or her designate, as the case may be, as an ex officio non-voting member of the board of directors. That the other amendments, Madam Speaker, seek to address several operational concerns, and also, while we are doing amendments to this bill or law, Madam Speaker, replacing the wording governing cabinet as it appears in the old style with cabinet as it is currently as a result of the 2009 Constitution. So, Madam Speaker, in terms of the bill, Clause 1 sets out the short title and commencement. Clause 2 seeks to amend the principal law by removing the words governing cabinet wherever these words appear and substituting the word cabinet. Clause 3 of the bill, Madam Speaker, amends Section 4 of the principal law so that the chief officer in the ministry charged with responsibility for the bank or his or her designate and the financial secretary, as I mentioned, or his or her designate are ex officio members of the board. Of course, Madam Speaker, this, as we have done in other laws fairly recently, governing what are statutory authorities or government companies, this is done to increase communication and dialogue between the ministry with responsibility or supervisory responsibility and the entity itself or the board, in this case the board of directors of the bank. Clause 4, Madam Speaker, proposes to amend Section 12 of the principal law so that the onus to comply with directions given by the minister is placed on the board of directors rather than the bank. The wording historically has just referred to the bank. Certainly, looking back in the past, in scenarios where directions were issued, there was confusion about from the board as to whether that was to be accepted by the board as a direction to them or whether it was to the management of the bank. So I'm not sure that there's total legitimacy in that concern, Madam Speaker, but we are including that just for absolute clarification. Clause 5, Madam Speaker, the bill amends Section 13 of the principal law so that certain persons, for example, members of the board of directors of the bank, as well as members of the Legislative Assembly, are prohibited from acting as personal guarantors for loans from the bank. Obviously, Madam Speaker, this is designed to remove situations in which there may be a conflict or undue pressure brought to bear in respect of loan applications made to the bank. And unfortunately, Madam Speaker, there are past examples of that sort of scenario, which is why we wish to address that. Clause 6, Madam Speaker, of the bill seeks to amend Section 21 of the principal law to align, to change the financial year so that it begins to a calendar year, so it begins on 1st January and ends on December 31st. Obviously, the intention there, Madam Speaker, is to align that with the financial year of the government. Clause 7, Madam Speaker, seeks to amend paragraph 2 of the first schedule to the principal law so that the areas of expertise from which directors are selected are changed to persons who are more qualified and experienced in the banking and financial services industry and can understand and appreciate and assist more in developing robust policies and procedures specifically for the operations of the bank, Madam Speaker. Obviously, the intention there is to try to ensure that the banks and its operations are well protected by its management, and that the bank can effectively be a self-sustaining entity which meets its objectives. Madam Speaker, that completes my presentation in respect of this amendment bill, and I commend it to this Honourable House, and I thank all of those who, including the Government Legal Drafting Department, who assisted with this, and those in my ministry. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Final call. Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I'll call on the Honourable Minister for Financial Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just to thank members for their tacit support.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Development Bank Amendment Bill 2016 be given a second reading. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Against, no. The ayes have it. The Development Bank Amendment Bill 2016 has been given its second reading.
The Evidence Amendment Bill 2017.
I recognize the Honourable Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill entitled "The Bill for a Law to Amend the Evidence Law 2011 Revision to make provision for the giving of evidence through television links at trials of offences that are triable only summarily and for incidental and connected purposes."
The bill has been duly moved. Does the Honourable Mover wish to speak to the bill?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this is a very, very short bill. And for what it's worth, what has happened, Madam Speaker, is that currently Section 37 of the Evidence Law entitled witnesses to give evidence through video link in specified circumstances, including, Madam Speaker, when they are abroad or outside of the island. However, the way the section is worded, Madam Speaker, is that this facility is only confined to certain proceedings, or proceedings involving certain offenses. So for A offenses, murder, rape, etc., and also for B offenses, which are the ones triable either way. But, Madam Speaker, it does not include what we call C offenses, which are the ones that tribal only in the summer court. I am not exactly sure why it was designed that way. I think it was contemplated at the time that when these C offenses comes on for trial, they wouldn't have been so heavily contested, and therefore you probably might need experts to give evidence in these matters. However, Madam Speaker, what has happened in recent years is that more and more of these summary matters are being heavily contested, including DUI matters, and requiring the Crown, Madam Speaker, to have to resort to getting experts to give evidence. And usually these experts are from abroad. And this, of course, is being done at great expenses compared to the fines that would be levied if the person is convicted. So rather than having to fly witnesses, experts from abroad, or witnesses for that matter, the objective here is to amend the law so that persons who are required to testify in only C offenses, purely summary offenses, can do so also via video link evidence, Madam Speaker. That, in a nutshell, is the mischief that the bill is aiming to deal with. And so I commend the bill to honourable members.
Does any other member wish to speak? Recognize the Honourable Member from East End.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, whilst I appreciate the objective of this amendment, there are some other concerns in relation to video links that I would bring to the attention of the Honorable Attorney General and ask that he address them upon his response. Madam Speaker, it was my understanding when we did this many years ago that this was exclusively for the taking of evidence from witnesses, the cross-examination and the likes, with the lawyers being here in this country. Madam Speaker, it is now my understanding, and that may be incorrect. It has come to my attention that there is a belief, factual or not, that lawyers are being hired now in these cases, do not even come to Cayman and conduct trials from overseas. I don't know how that is possible, but certainly there are the possibilities. I guess it could be done. I think we have enough trouble as it is. Currently, we're not getting the many lawyers complain of the lack of the knowledge transfer. And if such is the case, this would make it even worse. So I don't know if it's the case, but certainly if that is what is being done, that was not the intent of this video link. I recall specifically that we even extended it to the prison, or prison here, at some stage subsequent to the original enactment of the provision to allow video links for the taking of evidence and the cross-examination of witnesses. But with the trial being conducted from here, as opposed to lawyers being overseas and not having to come here. So, Madam Speaker, I just would ask if the Attorney General would address that, and if such is the case, is it proper? And if not, what are we going to do about that?
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Final call. Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I'll recognize the Honourable Attorney General for his reply.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the honourable member, thanks for his question. He spoke generally about trials, and I don't know whether he meant in the context of the criminal court or generally civil matters and everything. I don't know. Thank you. Thank you. Madam Speaker, I am not aware of, well, let me put it this way. The primary objective of the video link facility is to facilitate the giving of evidence by witnesses who are either outside of the jurisdiction, and it is probably more cost-effective and convenient to allow them to testify. And in the context of the prison, yes, sometimes it's more convenient to conduct a remand as well from the prisons, instead of having to literally bus the prisoners back and forth and so on. But Madam Speaker, he spoke more widely about trials being conducted. And if I understand him correctly, well, first of all, the trials are usually conducted in the Cayman Islands. That's how trials are done. And his concern is that the lawyers are elsewhere and participating in the trials. Right. Madam Speaker, I am aware that there are instances, for example, where a hearing is being conducted in the Cayman Islands. And you might have either directions hearing or probably in the case of a criminal matter, I don't know, maybe a mention. And it is not, I wasn't economical, or isn't economical to fly leading counsel, because usually Queen's Counsel are involved in certain instances. To fly leading counsel from, say, London or some other place to come here for a 5 or 10 minutes hearing. And the judge, in his discretion, has the power to allow counsel in those circumstances to participate in the proceedings from abroad. But, Madam Speaker, usually, invariably, and I'm pretty confident about this, is that there is a local instructing attorney who is involved in the proceedings. So you will have a junior, someone here, who is also involved, and it wouldn't make a lot of sense just to fly his senior leader here, just to deal with some minor directions hearing or something. The Grand Court rules have been amended years ago to give the court a discretion to facilitate such an happening, Madam Speaker. So it is permissible under the rules. But I'm not aware of any full-blown trial being conducted with the attorney from abroad taking part via video link evidence. I certainly would need to confirm that, but I'm confident that it doesn't happen. I think what happens is subject to my confirming, but what happened is usually a directions hearing or some other sort of a preliminary hearing with a view to, at some stage, progressing to a trial, which is going to take place here, where all the parties are here. And so those are the only instances that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of any lawyers being ensconced abroad and conducting a trial using the video link evidence, Madam Speaker. So I hope I have been able to assist him. What I can do is, given that I wasn't really expecting this, I will certainly undertake to confirm my understanding and speak to the members about it. But I do thank him, and I commend the bill to this Honourable House. Thank you.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Evidence Amendment Bill 2017 be given a second reading. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, no. The ayes have it. The Evidence Amendment Bill 2017 has been given a second reading.
The Penal Code Amendment Bill 2017.
Recognize the Honourable Attorney General.
I thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move for the second reading of a bill entitled A Bill for a Law to Amend the Penal Code 2013 revision to make provision for the making of sexual harm prevention orders, the offences of possession of articles for use to defraud, and making or supplying articles for use to defraud, and for incidental and connected purposes.
The bill has been duly moved. Does the Honourable Attorney General wish to speak to the bill?
Yes, Madam Speaker, thank you. Madam Speaker, again, this is a relatively short bill and has two components, as I read from the title. Madam Speaker, the bill speaks to a sexual harm prevention order, Madam Speaker. This order is a mechanism that can be used by the court to protect the public, Madam Speaker, including particular persons, against serious violence, Madam Speaker, sexual violence, sorry. And most importantly, Madam Speaker, it can be used to protect vulnerable children from sexual harm from certain individuals who are prone to bring such harm to them. And Madam Speaker, we speak about sexual harm, and it includes physical as well as psychological harm caused by persons who are committing sexual offenses. And so the order itself, Madam Speaker, is aimed at prohibiting whoever is the subject of the order from doing anything that would normally be prescribed in the order itself. And these conditions, for example, may include prohibiting the persons from travel in intra-island or within the island itself, or even traveling off-island for a finite period, and keeping away from certain premises or being involved in certain employment involving, for example, children or a vulnerable person or group of persons, Madam Speaker. And of course, the order itself would be reviewable on a periodic basis, so that if there is certainly no need for it, then it can be discontinued. Madam Speaker, of course, the application would be made by the Director of Public Prosecutions after discussion with the Royal Cayman Islands Police Force or Service and other agencies, for example, Department of Children and Family Services are in a similar agency. And it is contemplated that some sort of a risk assessment or risk analysis would be done prior to the imposition of the order. The court would have to be satisfied on a balance of probabilities that it is really necessary before the order itself is made, given the restrictive nature of it. And of course, Madam Speaker, given our constitutional framework, the order itself would also have to be very proportionate to the contemplated risk that this person will pose. So if a person is convicted before the court, Madam Speaker, for one of these offenses, the court, upon application by the DPP, may instead of, or in addition to any sentence, may also impose or make a sexual harm prevention order. Madam Speaker, we don't have, well, I was going to say we don't have sex register, Madam Speaker, sexual offense register. But given the prevalence of some of these offenses relating to children these days, it was considered that this is a very useful tool that should be available to law enforcement agencies and the court, Madam Speaker, to help to protect our vulnerable, including children, from certain kind of predatory behavior, Madam Speaker. The bill contemplates, Madam Speaker, that before making the order, the court would explain to the convicted person the effect of the order and the consequences which may follow in the event of non-compliance. I'm sorry. And the person, Madam Speaker, who fails to comply may be, in certain circumstances, arrested without warrant by the police and taken before the court. And the failure, Madam Speaker, non-compliance itself is, in fact, a separate offense that can be dealt with by the court. A person who, without reasonable cause, failed to comply with any of the requirements in the order, or who attempts to commit an offense and is liable on summary conviction to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 4 years, I think it is. Yeah, I think. So, or a $3,000 fine. So, Madam Speaker, I mentioned also that the court can vary the order, discharge the order, or you can renew an order. And it is also correct, Madam Speaker, that the court may impose, in certain circumstances, may impose what is called an interim order. That is, Madam Speaker, an order that would be imposed prior to the final determination of the court case itself. So Madam Speaker, in the ordinary sphere of things, and given the times that we're living in, I think, Madam Speaker, that, in my view, certainly, this is a very useful framework to have in place to help, as I say, to mitigate from the kind of predatory attack or interference that we will have against youngsters, children, and other vulnerable in our society. Madam Speaker, the other aspect of the bill deals with criminalizing, if you will, persons who are found in possession of certain articles for the purpose of defrauding our financial institutions, for example. I think honorable members are aware that there have been numerous instances, Madam Speaker, where visitors from far away as Romania, Malaysia, Hungary, and Venezuela have come to these islands for specific purposes of defrauding our financial institutions by using clone cards, Madam Speaker. That is a sort of a skimming device is placed on the institution's, we call it, the machine, the ATM machine. That skimming device is placed on the ATM machine and then is used to capture the credit card numbers of the users of the ATM machine. The numbers, Madam Speaker, is then superimposed onto something like a gift cards or other similar makeshift cards, and then is used to then withdraw funds from customers' accounts. It has become a major problem in recent times in the Cayman Islands, Madam Speaker, with a number of foreign officials convicted and imprisoned over the last couple of years. Indeed, according to my information, Madam Speaker, between October 2015, 31st of October 2015, and November, December, that same year, some 51 fraudulent withdrawals were made from one bank alone, and some 340 attempted fraudulent withdrawals, on the same bank, totaling amounts about 97,000 Cayman Islands dollars. Other banks, Madam Speaker, have also fallen victim to this scam, and one bank confirmed some 59 such fraudulent transactions. So, Madam Speaker, this bill will, among other things, allow for persons to be searched for possession of these clone cards, especially at the port of entry. And if found in possession of them, the mere possession could lead to an arrest and conviction of the offense of conspiracy to defraud, as well as possession of articles to defraud. And the sentence, Madam Speaker, is sufficiently robust, in our view, to serve as a deterrent if these persons are in fact caught and convicted. Madam Speaker, I know that this is just one in a number of measures being taken to address this attack on our financial services industry. The government some time ago also agreed that visa restrictions were put in place for persons coming from some of these countries to also cut down on the incidents of persons deliberately traveling to these islands to perpetuate these fraud, Madam Speaker. And so I certainly commend the bill to honorable members of this House, both in terms of the framework for the imposition of a sexual prevention harm order and the sexual harm prevention order, and the criminalization of these devices, clone cards, to commit fraud on our financial institutions. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Easton.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to make a short contribution to this, the Penal Code Amendment Bill 2017. Mr. Speaker, I hasten to tell the, Madam Speaker, I hasten to tell the Attorney General that this does not go far enough. Maybe it's that position that I take is more because of the position I have taken with these kind of behaviors. So I trust that everyone will take it for what it's worth. Madam Speaker, what is not here are exactly the things that the Attorney General says we don't have. A register for sex offenders. What is not here is the notification of neighbors, the locations, the sexual predators, or the convicted sexual offender, the location that they have, one, been moved to, or by order in this, sent to, or they're restricted to a particular area, such as they can't come out of East End or North Side or Georgetown or something of that nature. Now, here we are. They are guilty, whether they pled guilty, they're found guilty, they are guilty. And then we're going to apply to the court for an order to prevent them from traveling certain areas. And it may be if that was committed, that particular act was committed in a district, then you may say that they cannot go back to that district for a period of 5 years. But we are foisting them upon someone else unknowingly. You think because it was committed in one district in this country, there's a high likelihood that it would reoccur in that. I agree with that. But there's no less a likelihood of it being committed in the district that you send them to. When you are a sexual predator, they need to be identified. We need to let the neighborhood know that they're there. Madam Speaker, I am going to connect these dots that I'm creating here. too many times we have seen instances where there's time has been served. They're out on license. They come back in society. Their names are not called for the fear of exposing the child's name, which I understand. But this is a small society. There aren't, we know how the Mall Road is. Huh? Not Mall no more, no, it's asphalt road now. But the barbecue road, yeah. But Madam Speaker, we know who they are. And they come right back into neighborhoods where we have young children. No one dare go ask them what they're doing there for fear of embarrassment. And people are terrified with their children. We are creating environments that could cause us problems down the road. Not all human beings are going to be tolerant with these people in their neighborhoods. Madam Speaker, I'm not encouraging our people to do anything, because there is the police and the likes. People get so uptight about this that the least little thing they see, they call us. What are you doing with this man out here? What are you doing with this person here? Madam Speaker, I believe it is time we put these people, like we do in other countries, they must register, and people must know what neighborhood they're in. And the police must keep closer contact with them. Madam Speaker, it bothers me, and it did I was incensed for the last 3-4 years with a particular case. Madam Speaker, in particular, those who come to our shores and become Cayman, by whatever vehicle that is. They do these things, and then we let them back out into our society. Despite the immigration law saying that if you get convicted and serve for over a year, your status may be revoked and you're deported. Madam Speaker, the difficulties with that is that we know not where these people came from. We know not their behavior. And they express one here that is indefensible, that it is the most gross behavior any society has to put up with. And we try to keep them in our country. That's what we do. That's what we do. We need to wish them fond farewell, smooth sailing, and hurricane winds upon their back. I don't want them to know but I want hurricane winds against their back. So they sail, and hopefully, it is like the world is the same shape it was before Columbus discovered that it was round. It's flat, and they sail right over. Whomever it was discovered
Member
that it was
from
round.
Easton, I'm glad that you qualified that. Otherwise, with hurricane winds behind their back, they would come back to the jurisdiction much quicker.
You understand why I said before it was discovered that it was round? It was always believed to have been flat. And I want them to sail off the edge of the world, never to return. Madam Speaker, I take note that this bill also says, upon application after consultation with the DPP may apply, can apply upon after consultation with the police. Madam Speaker, I disagree with the Attorney General in that regard. I think we need to put in there, in all instances, when there is a conviction, can't leave this up to such possibilities and leave it up to some decision if they feel it's necessary. May apply. For the 5A1, the Director of Public Prosecution, after consultation with the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service or any other relevant agency, may apply to the court for a sexual harm prevention order. I don't think it should be a choice. We need to go further and put these people on register and notify neighborhoods that the people are there. Now, I don't know, maybe Madam Speaker, we view that as being worse than not making them know. I don't know. But I know what. By the time some people in that neighborhood find out, by virtue of not notifying them, anything could have happened. Anything can happen. Madam Speaker, we pussyfoot around with this thing too much. And we're going to push people, good, ordinary citizens over the age, to protect their family. And in the protection of their family, Madam Speaker, I see what the Attorney General is trying to do. I applaud him, but I want to see more. I want to see more. And it may be my position. I have no sympathy for anybody with that. They like to talk about when they go to prison that they find God. When you live northward or what? Sometimes, Madam Speaker, in other countries, you don't find him. The legislature legislate that you meet him for them kind of behaviors. Madam Speaker, maybe I'm wrong, but that's where I stand. Every other soul in this world can stand where they want. That's me. That's me. Thank God, God, I believe that you had some mercies on me and gave me 2 little boys and no little girls. It got be there with mercy. He watched over me, Madam Speaker. Always want a little girl, but never got none. And it might be that God know that something will happen. You hear? Madam Speaker, people will die for their family, for their children. I have a number of nieces. Because, Madam Speaker, it's usually the little girls that these people go after. It's usually the little girls that they go after. Need to stop it. And then their family come now defending them. Didn't do it while they have been convicted or they pled guilty. Didn't do it now. Well, which way did it then? And now you must have mercy on them. Not me, not my heart. Maybe I don't have a heart, but I'll live without one in this instance. And Madam Speaker, the other section of this bill, this amendment bill, section 283, which include possession of articles for use to defraud. I hope this includes things like documentation, holding themselves out as business people. We haven't seen too many instances of holding themselves out here as lawyers, but you know, that's going to be along the way to represent people. But there are many instances where they hold themselves out as business people as well. And they're going to, they're representing people who wants to do investments and the likes. I hope this covers that too, because we saw a few of those here recently, fooling the government of the day, or whichever day it is, they do it. I'm not saying this government is immune from it, but too many people come here and see how vulnerable we are, how friendly we are, and they continue to take advantage. They go and they start up their businesses, selling cars, and they're on work permit, and they go and that is almost akin to defraud. At least they're breaking the law. They're not supposed to be doing business. They order vehicles off the internet, sell them. Madam Speaker, I believe it's a step in the right direction. But again, maybe the Romanians, the country of Romania needs to go on that prohibited list of countries. Because we have that list too, Madam Speaker. And that can be modified from time to time, I believe, by cabinet. Because if we see there's a tendency for that nationality to try and defraud, then let's stop the others from coming. Don't we have one prison now that we're supposed to extradite? Or they're from a different country? Turkey, here you are, flapping wings. Madam Speaker, that too, We need to be very, very careful. And the times have changed, Madam Speaker. When I was growing up, there were very few people coming here. It started when I was growing up. But these people were genuine. A friend of mine who I got to know after I became an adult started coming here in 1973 and established himself here in 1973. Those people genuinely came to this country. They came here because they fell in love with it, and they remain in love with it. He has built many homes here. Only 10 years ago got Cayman status. But that was not his objective. His objective was living in this country in peace and tranquility. These people come here for a different reason now. Completely different. They see our glory and they want a piece of it. And they're taking it through fraud. And we need to stop that. We need to make bold decisions. If we see the Romanians are the one doing it, put them on the prohibited country list. Let their own people keep their problem there, because we have to keep and take care of our problems. Let them stay over there. I don't know why we make these little laws. We got to catch them first for this law to be effective. But if they're not here, there's no need to try to catch them. If they're not here, we ain't got to worry about them. If they slip in by boat, then we catch them, deport them. That's all, Madam Speaker. The time has come to stop not only making laws to prevent it because they're here, because they're going to continue to do it. Let us make the country a prohibited country. Your citizens cannot come here because those that have been here is carrying on behavior that is untoward. So keep your people home, and we will stay out of your way, and you out of ours. I don't know what we are afraid of. I thought this, everybody else putting up walls. And we can't write one prohibition in one law. Or we're afraid because it going to disrupt our coastline, put a wall up. Well, we can put up walls too. Mightn't be the physical ones. Like our good friends to the and neighbors to the north are doing. But we can put up walls too. This is our country. We need to protect it. And if we see an increase in this kind of behavior that is psychologically and physically, economically destroying our country, stop them. Oh, it's all well and good for us to be stopped from going to someone else's country, but we shouldn't stop others from coming to ours. Oh, yeah? Oh, yeah? What is the percentage of some of these people in our country? Probably just a couple hundred of them. Are they that important to us? They're not, in my respectful submission. They're not. They bring no value to us. They steal from us. Madam Speaker, I may be considered to be a little cruel in this regard, but I am also cognizant that I have to protect. the people that I represent. Madam Speaker, I trust that the Attorney General will address those two issues of putting, he said that we had incidences of the Romanians, 50-something cases, 50-something instances of trying to withdraw from the banks, not cases, but one person was, I think he said 50-odd plus 40-odd, and one person was responsible for 50-odd of those or something like that. Let's see what can happen about putting them on the prohibited list. Everybody wants to think about it, but nobody wants to say it. We need to do it. Madam Speaker, I thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? The fourth elected member from the District of Bordentown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I also want to give a short contribution to this, the discussion on this bill. And I'll start off by saying that I will support the bill. And I want to thank the Honorable Attorney General for bringing this bill forward. I think it's timely. We have, I think all of us have been acutely aware of what seems to be an increase in crimes of a sexual nature in our little community. I don't know if it's an increase in the number of crimes or an increase in the number of persons being caught. But either way, Madam Speaker, I think that this bill is timely, and I'm happy to support the Attorney General. Madam Speaker, on the order paper, there is a motion being brought by myself, seconded by the first elected member from Bordentown, called Child Sexual Abuse, which primarily dealt with the subject matter of what this bill is trying to address. So again, I have to say it is timely, Madam Speaker, because it clearly is on the minds of the government and the opposition. And it's an issue that needs to be addressed with urgency. I don't know if we'll get to the debate on those private members' motions, given the time has been taken away on us, Madam Speaker, and I won't try to debate my motion here now, but I think this bill does give me an opportunity to make a few points that would have come up during that debate as well. But Madam Speaker, I have to agree with the member from East End. Although I am supporting the bill, I don't think it goes far enough. And I've had ample time to spend some time talking to individuals in the community who are more involved in dealing with this issue. Some have become activists, so to speak, and a few of them have come forward to me and actually asked me to bring forward this issue, which is what I was planning to do. But there is a significant problem in our community, Madam Speaker. And I don't think that we're going to make significant progress in dealing with that if we don't, as the member from East End said, take it further. If we don't take a more aggressive approach to crimes of this nature. I understand the rationale behind what is being done in this bill, where we're going to restrict the movement of individuals who may be involved in sexual crimes and so forth. But I think we need to go further in establishing some form of sexual offender registry. Madam Speaker, I understand the downside of that. I think the member from East End mentioned it, is that there's a potential for the victim to be identified. And none of us would want that, Madam Speaker. But the upside is that people in the community would know and would have the benefit of knowing who these individuals were and just how dangerous they are. Madam Speaker, it is a concern that is widespread. These individuals, having served time in prison or not, are in our communities. Madam Speaker, they go to church with us. They use public facilities, public parks. Madam Speaker, I have even seen one individual who seems to be in the habit of hanging out at the 24-hour gas stations late at night. And I've walked into one of those establishments and seen him sitting there, not doing anything, just sitting. And me, as a pretty heavy-set, strapping man, did get sort of a chill when I saw him. I had the benefit of knowing who he was. I don't think the young ladies working behind the counter at 1:30 in the morning, 2 o'clock, would know. But I took the time to observe and say to myself, he's not even purchasing anything. Why is he just sitting there? Madam Speaker, I understand that those types of behaviors are an indication of a psychological issue in most cases. And I know there are some out there who would be a bit sympathetic towards the individual who is suffering from that mental illness. And I agree that steps must be taken to treat them and deal with them however we can. But the greater burden, Madam Speaker, is on the victims and the potential victims. We have to protect those, especially children, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I saw, well, no, that matters before the court, so I won't discuss it here, Madam Speaker. But it was something that I read recently that, no, I won't delve into that, Madam Speaker. But Madam Speaker, having a registry here also gives us the benefit of being able to better identify individuals who come here from other jurisdictions. Because a registry here could obviously contain information that's held in registries in other jurisdictions. So I think that would also be a huge benefit, because Cayman is not the same Cayman that we all grew up in, Madam Speaker. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, I think everyone knew everyone. The country has evolved to where people come and go on a daily basis now, Madam Speaker, and, you know, we're all busy, we're all working, we're all involved in our own lives, and some of that village approach has gone. I don't think we'll ever get it back. And there are people now who live within 10, 15 feet of each other who don't know each other. And with the number of individuals coming into the Cayman Islands now, Madam Speaker, it is a concern that we need to not pry into people's business and backgrounds, but we need to know if they pose a risk to us and our children and our communities. So I think having an offender registry, and I'm willing to say in some form, that would still protect the victims, would be useful. It would be extremely helpful, especially for families raising young children. Madam Speaker, I remember growing up, and on any given Saturday, after my mother forced me to eat a bowl of cornmeal porridge, I would disappear for pretty much the rest of the day. I would be gone. Sorry? I would be gone. My mother wouldn't really be overly concerned about where I was. She would know that I was with my friends. I would occasionally get into a little bit of trouble, but nothing severe. But she had the knowledge that, and the comfort of knowing that I was safe. Madam Speaker, I have 2 daughters now, and neither of the 2 of them have had the benefit of having the freedom to leave my house on a Saturday morning and just be out doing whatever they wanted to do with their friends. If I wasn't checking on them, their mother was checking on them, or their grandmother was checking on them, or their grandfather. Madam Speaker, Cayman has changed. And as much as we would like to go back to those days when we could all feel safe and be assured that we were safe, we're not. So I think it's incumbent upon us, Madam Speaker, to take whatever steps necessary, especially in the light of what is going on in our communities, to ensure that we are putting steps in place to, as much as possible, protect our young children. So I fully support the idea of a sexual offender registry. And hopefully when the Honorable Attorney General winds up, he will maybe give some clarity on what the government's position is on that. But another area in the bill that concerns me, Madam Speaker, is also the fact that I don't see anything in the bill that seeks to penalize anyone for assisting. I see where if someone violates the conditions imposed on them by this law, that they can be penalized. But we've seen so many cases in concern with other crimes that people who assist individuals to break the law can be punished. I just don't see anything. Aiding and abetting would be covered. Okay, so I mean that was a query I had because I didn't see it spelled out there, but you don't have to spell it out. Okay, I'm being informed, Madam Speaker, that it's implied then, or covered under other legislation. Okay. So, Madam Speaker, I think getting to the root of the problem is also something that we need to spend some time discussing. I think that sexual abuse and sexual crimes have been taboo subjects in our community for too long. I think they're topics that are rarely discussed to the extent that they should be. And I think that a lot of the cure is going to come from that sort of approach. I know that the law, making it illegal for people to do certain things can be preventative, but to really get to the root of the problem and cure it, we need to dig a bit deeper. My view, Madam Speaker, is that from the reception age in our government schools and private schools right up to when they graduate, there needs to be a much more involved process of education around this subject. From the reception age, I think we should be ensuring that our young kids are able to recognize the signs of a sexual predator and understand what is required of them to protect themselves in terms of reporting, speaking to someone, avoiding contact. But as we move up into the adolescent years, Madam Speaker, when all of our young people go through that change, when they move from being children to teenagers and hormones come into play, and we've heard the stories, there's some very inappropriate behavior that can happen and has happened in our schools. And I think, again, finding a way to reach those young people, to educate them on what is considered appropriate behavior and what isn't, especially, Madam Speaker, in this digital age, when we all walk around with a smartphone that is connected to the rest of the world. And it's very difficult. I know I have a teenager. Well, she's 19 now, but I still consider her a teenager. But when those devices can bring unlimited amounts of media into a young person's contact, and a lot of us, I know, we say we monitor their usage. We try to make sure that they're not using those devices for anything wrong. But it's inevitable that they're going to come across something. Some may even seek it out of curiosity, Madam Speaker. And you can't police that. You have to instill in a young person's mind what is appropriate and what is not. And then they have to make the choice. Some won't make the right choice, Madam Speaker, but I'm looking at our young, especially the young men who, as they're nearing that age of being able to drink legally, some before they're able to drink legally, they go out and they're exposed to alcohol, they're exposed to females, and they're in an environment where the music may be contributing to their emotional state, the alcohol is contributing, and they make poor choices, Madam Speaker. I've known of incidents where young women have gone out and someone has dropped the drug in their drink, doped them, with the intention of having their way with them when they get to the point where they can't help themselves. I've known countless young women who have said that to me, that it's happened to them. I'll tell you, it's not really a funny story, but long time ago I was out and someone, I suspect, doped the drink of a young lady I was talking to, but she didn't finish her drink. She said she didn't want it anymore. She handed it to me, and I drank it. I don't think that was the result the person wanted, but I can tell you, Madam Speaker, I was sober 1 minute and gone the next. It happens. These drugs are out there. They're available. And they're being put in the hands of our young men, and they are using them for wrong and to take advantage. Huh? No, I went home and passed out. I had a query on what happened next, but no, I don't want to make too much light of the situation, Madam Speaker, because that was serious. I mean, I still have no idea what that drug was. So I could have ended up in the hospital or worse. And it happens. It is no secret. It happens. So, Madam Speaker, I think that goes back to the fact that we need to spend more time on the preventative side as well. We can legislate forever. But until these behaviors are corrected, until we really spend the necessary time instilling that in our young people and guiding them and making sure they understand what is appropriate behavior and what is not. Because their judgment is becoming blurred. They are being bombarded with media from everywhere. They are seeing things on Facebook, Instagram, or whatever. And it's behavior that is creeping into our community, our young people. And they're making the assessment, Madam Speaker, that is appropriate. I've seen videos of young men doing things to women, throwing them on the ground, and it's supposed to be dancing. It's not dancing. It's abuse. But it's become mainstream, and young minds are fragile, and they're easily influenced. So, Madam Speaker, I want to congratulate the Honorable Attorney General for bringing this. It is a needed step, but I would encourage him to go further. I don't think that he need fear that he won't have any support from any of us in taking it further. I think, if people want to make us the villains, the bad guys, for being strong in our approach, so be it. I'm willing to wear that label. But I think our young people are worth it. So if there's any way that that registry can be added, he certainly would have my support, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? The third elected member from West Bay.
Madam Speaker, I too would like to stand and thank the Attorney General for bringing this legislation or this bill. And having spoken to two social workers and to a group of young women who have had the fortune of coaching on the national team a few years back, they all too feel that the bill has not gone further enough, like the member from East End has said. I don't need to go on much, Madam Speaker, due to time and we know the constraints we are on. But we will be supporting this bill, Madam Speaker, and we do hope that in the next stage maybe some changes can be made to put more bite into the bill as well. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Recognize the fifth elected member from the District of Georgetown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to support this bill, but I will perhaps sound like a stuck record because I don't think it goes far enough. And I'm going to give some examples based on the research that I did, just to perhaps trigger a response from the Attorney General when he wraps up. Because, Madam Speaker, based on interventions by the first elected member from Bordentown and the fourth elected member from Bordentown in the past, which highlighted the community expectations on sexual offenses, their fears, what they thought about things like sentencing, rehabilitation, etc. I think that it's time that we give the people what they want so that they can feel safe in their homes, in their communities, and in public settings. Madam Speaker, as I understand it, and I'll only be dealing with the sexual harm prevention order component, Madam Speaker, because I think the other points have been made well enough. But as I understand it, these types of orders are intended to protect the public from offenders who have been convicted of a sexual or violent offense with some sort of sexual harm and who pose a risk of further sexual harm to the public. Madam Speaker, we just talked about the cautions bill, and we're about to pass that into law. In here, we talk about interim orders. But when you look at the UK and other places such as that, they also have cautions that they issue to people that show the propensity to commit these types of acts on members of the public. We also have sexual risk orders. Again, looking at the probability of them harming the public or children. And this is a sort of initial reprimand or final warning, if you must, before you get to the interim or the actual order. When those things occur in the UK, Madam Speaker, you have, right, they trigger full risk assessment of such a person, and a determination is made. And in some instances, sanctions, including disqualifications of working around children, occur. And we have to do these things, Madam Speaker, to show the public that we're taking their fears and their concerns seriously. They need to feel that penalties are appropriate. Madam Speaker, I don't recall seeing in this, when I read through it, any rehabilitation orders. And these people have this order against them. What's happening in the background in that period of time that the order is in place? Are we forcing them to get the help they so badly need? To at least be more aware of the offending behavior. Madam Speaker, other members speaking before me spoke about the need for a sexual offenders register, and that it's time. Madam Speaker, while I don't agree in such a small community as to having a public register where anyone can go in, anyone can see, what I do believe is that we should have a non-public register where the police, certain agencies involved, like the Department of Children and Family Services and all those other units that deal with youth, vulnerable people in our society, they absolutely need in their functions to have access to such a register. Because we need to start tracking statistics better. We need to start tracking profiles better. We need to be able to intervene when we see households maybe that have a propensity for these offending behaviors. Because if we can give the support and the focus early, it doesn't become escalating behavior that leads to things that we know happen in Cayman all too well. We've all, in this room especially, had a friend, and I say that because of the fraternity that some of the members here have, a friend that met a gruesome end, and that, I believe, is the escalation of sexual offenses, that behavior that manifested itself into this urge, or where they eventually claimed a life. That's what we're trying to deal with, Madam Speaker. We're trying to curb behaviors, protect the public, and stop escalation to that final end. Because at that time, nobody will feel that any sentence then is good enough. Madam Speaker, we don't talk here about all the notifications that need to go into this type of law, and the period of time in which these notifications need to be made. And I'm talking particularly about an offender who is on an order and they want to change their address, and who is subject to an order, and we need to get information about all their previous addresses and any addresses which, if they're involved in children, or in households where there are children, to notify those, and to notify of any impending change in address so that they can be tracked at all times. Those are the safety nets that need to be put in place so that the public feels that at least somebody knows that these people are going to be moving into their environment, or an environment where they could reoffend because they have access to children or other vulnerable members of society. And I think also in terms of any sort of non-public register, there needs to be notification of the family members of people that were victims, where somebody has the responsibility. If it's not the police, it's some other government agency that has the obligation under a law to notify family members of these people coming off orders, these people going on orders, any changes to the orders, any changes to the address. Because I guarantee you, those people will want to know. And by extension, anyone living around them would want to know. So, but at the very least, Madam Speaker, we need to keep the family in mind, because whoever has been the victim is going to be a victim for life. It doesn't end after the sexual offense ends. Exactly, like the first elected member from Borden Town said, and I couldn't say it better, they are ruined. And we need to show the sympathy. We need to show that family that we take their pain as our own, and we need to ensure that they have all the information that we can legally give them, that is set out in some sort of legislation, so that they can have surety as well of what they expect to receive. Madam Speaker, annual check-ins, where somebody has the obligation to say, we've checked on this person on an annual basis, and we know exactly where they are. We know where they are in their treatment. We know where they are in their occupation. We know all these things about them, and we are not just letting them slip through the cracks. Madam Speaker, I'd also go much further than this bill proposes, in that, especially in an age where, and I think some of the members spoke about it before, where we have access to the internet and all the things that that brings or gives access to. Further details need to be kept by the police, including perhaps the passports, bank accounts, credit cards, because those people that commit these offensive behaviors can get their jollies in other ways, and some of that is access through the internet. And you want to be able to see if they're accessing these types of materials. It's time also, Madam Speaker, we talk about it. We've heard that there are systems that are now gathering cobwebs. We hear all these things. It's time for a national ID and fingerprinting system on this island so that we can also track, Madam Speaker, people that are here, but are people that are coming here with this propensity to do harm, sexual harm on our public. And I think that we can't keep saying, oh, it's costly, and using that as an excuse. That overriding public interest is there. We need to be able to track these types of individuals to see where they are, where they're coming from, where they're going. We talk about travel restrictions here, Madam Speaker, and that's all well. But we also don't talk about what happens when someone from somewhere else comes in and how we deal with them and what we do and how we notify either their home jurisdictions or any other jurisdiction they might be leaving to go to after they've been in Cayman, because we know we have a transient society, Madam Speaker. People come on work permits and they stay anywhere from a few months to the rest of their lives. We can't have people coming here and being just happy that they're leaving when they've committed offenses either here or before they've come. It's our obligation, I think, as an international community to raise the awareness and to inform people so that this doesn't become someone else's problem without them at least knowing. I think we owe that to our international neighbors. So this sort of activity plus reciprocal enforceability arrangements with other countries for non-Caymanian offenders. We need to be seeing that in this bill, in this law. And we know where the majority of our people are coming from because we track the work permits. And at least with the major ones, we might not be able to do it with all of them, but at least the major ones, including the Caribbean, the UK, Canada, US, we absolutely should have these type of reciprocal information exchange and how we deal with people that would commit these types of offenses. We should also always remember the victim, right? And depending on the crime, the severity of it, some of these people should be on a register somewhere for the rest of their lives. There has to be some escalating component to this bill, Madam Speaker, because we can't say one size fits all. So how long are these notification periods. And Madam Speaker, the member from East End gave me an intervention, and I agree with him. And he said that it should be automatic on conviction, that type of notification order. Right? And I agree with him, so I thank the member. But Madam Speaker, again, you've heard members in this honorable House show great disgust and concern when these offenses occur with children. And we know that when that happens to a child, there is deep psychological and sometimes physical damage imposed on that child. And Madam Speaker, we need, again, to use the old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So I would expect and hope that in this bill, we would be looking at the activities that come before the actual sexual offense, including things like grooming of children, right? And again, assessing the risk at that stage of someone escalating that behavior into an actual physical or psychological abuse of a child. We need that to be an offense that is taken seriously under this type of bill, because we know even if there's no plan to meet the child to commit a sexual offense, that type of activity is an escalating activity. Any sort of communication between a child and an adult that has some sexual connotation, even if it's committing a sexual act in front of a child, causing the child to look at sexual images, those sorts of behaviors need to be looked at and assessed on a risk basis. Anywhere that the behavior of an adult gives reason to believe that the child or children are at risk from that person's conduct, we need to try to intervene as early as possible. And so those types of interventions should be governed by this type of legislation, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when we give these orders out, there needs to be some further communication of them, even if it's to the nation's police stations and the other multi-agencies across the islands. Because people can leave one district to go to the next, but in Cayman we can leave one island and go to the next. And if people don't know and you're starting over, it could be a while before it registers on somebody that this person had done something before, because ignorance is bliss. And the best guard against something like this is information, and relevant information passed on immediately at conviction. That's what is necessary, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I remember watching a documentary on, I think it was HBO Sports. And I'm not saying that the penalties are the same here as they would be in the US, but we know the situations occur here that could lead to what I'm about to say. And it was about a rising football, American football, high school player who was going to go on to fame and glory based on all the statistics and records and all those things that they were breaking at the time. And in the state that they were in, they committed a sexual act with another minor. They were both minors. He happened to be a bit older than the young lady involved. But then he was sentenced and became a sexual offender for consensual sex before the age of 17. And so these so-called Romeo and Juliet offenders that are juveniles, I think we should also look at some of those things, because if we categorize them on the sexual offenders list and we deal with them in the same way as deviant behavior, we could actually be setting up somebody for a future that where they're labeled and so I think those nuances need to also be looked at in any type of legislation, so that sometimes we protect our vulnerable from themselves. We also need to look at things, Madam Speaker, like, and I know people might have a chuckle about this and say that we're too small that this could occur, but we have examples of it occurring. We have complaints about it occurring. Child abduction, Madam Speaker, right? And warning notices that go out, again, based on risk. We've had adults that take children away from their homes and they go missing for days and weeks. Whether we like it or not, that is child abduction, right? So we need to deal with that sort of activity in a bill that's intended to become a law to deal with this type. And then, Madam Speaker, and I guess and I think I know the answer to this, but I'll raise it anyway, and I'll let the Attorney General correct me. But we need to clearly define what a sexual offender and what sexual harm is, and how do police prove this. And we also need to give that information in layman's terms to the members of society. Madam Speaker, we need to show what triggers the conviction, what triggers things like cautions, what triggers all the penalties and steps that come from somebody perceived to be perpetrating sexual harm in our communities. Madam Speaker, what we also need to do, I think that's missing from this particular bill, is look at people found guilty by reason of insanity or some other mental disability as well. Because we can't just have found guilty, but where there are some mental issues there. We need to ensure that we don't, again, whitewash all these people together, because I don't think that as a community, even though we abhor the act, if somebody is, for lack of better words, in their right minds, I think that we need to look at somebody that could possibly be defined as insane or some other mental disability or reduced capacity, Madam Speaker. And we need to deal with them accordingly, and we need to deal with them appropriately. We also need to list those coordinating agencies that I kind of touched on before. Who is responsible? Who needs to get the information? And we heard yesterday in the Public Authorities Bill that we want to be very prescriptive. I think in situations like this, we have to be very prescriptive because we can't leave any room for interpretation or doubt. And we have to have that link between all those organizations, including, like I already said, the DCFS, but the employment agency, the NWDA, things that deal with passports, all those agencies need to be on that list. So when these notifications of these orders go out, there is that domino effect, and we know exactly who has the information. They know exactly what to do with the information. They know exactly when that information changes and when things that need to be brought to their attention are brought. So I think that could be more prescriptive. We also need those extra jurisdictional agreements, Madam Speaker, so that when our people go abroad and carry out those offenses, and we've had situations in the past where people that were away in school or away living in another country committed various offenses like this, we need to be able to have the agreements to ensure that we're getting the information that we can track them on their re-entry, because they should not be able to run from someplace, come back home, and be shrouded by a veil of misinformation or no information, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm sure that the Attorney General will tell me that all these things have been considered and that they're in some other law, and I'll be happy when he does, but I just raise them because they're the things that I think people would want to be assured of, that we're covered under this or any complementary type of legislation. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the first elected member from Bordentown.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to, we're at a stage, as referred to at times, after the fact. What I want to briefly look at, Madam Speaker, is we need to get to the root cause of these problems. I just want to read, with your permission, Madam Speaker, a little prayer that someone sent to me this morning, very, very early.
Permission granted.
As we all know, Madam Speaker, the Lord's Prayer is not allowed in most U.S. public schools anymore. But a young 15-year-old kid in Minnesota wrote this. Now I sit me down in school where praying is against the rule. For this great nation under God finds mention of him very odd. If scriptures now the class recites, it violates the Bill of Rights. And any time my head I bow becomes a federal matter now. Our hair can be purple, orange, or green. That's no offense. It's a freedom scene. But the law is specific. The law is precise. Prayers spoken aloud are a serious vice. for praying in a public hall might offend someone with no faith at all. In silence alone, we must meditate. God's name is prohibited by the state. We're allowed to cuss and dress like freaks and pierce our noses, tongues, and cheeks. They've outlawed guns, but before that, the Bible. To quote the good book makes me liable. We can elect a pregnant senior queen and the unwed daddy or senior king. It's inappropriate to teach right from wrong. We're taught that such judgments do not belong. We can get our condoms and birth controls, study witchcraft, vampires, and totem poles. But the 10 Commandments are not allowed. No word of God must reach this crowd. It's scary here, I must confess. When chaos reigns, the school's a mess. So Lord, the silent plea I make, should I be shot, my soul please take. Madam Speaker, we know the chaos in the great United States. Seems like some of these men, the testosterone has gone wild. We need to deal with the prosecution. I've seen in the past where sometimes it takes 3 to 4 years before some of these cases are even heard in our systems. Law enforcement seems to be lax in dealing with these sexual predators. As has been revealed, Madam Speaker, in evidence that comes out of the court system. I will take my hat off to one of the justices, Justice Quinn, some of his sentencing. I think he's been doing a fantastic job. Madam Speaker, it's scary what's happening around us. The great United States has now literally become the cesspool of the world. And I need not say what happens there. It doesn't take long to get here because of the internet and television and so on and so forth. I've been just recently informed of this nasty and horrific movie that's recently been released in the States called Corpus Christi. Let's pray it doesn't get down here. It's about Jesus and his disciples, as homosexuals. Lord, have mercy. I don't know what's happening to this world, Madam Speaker. But I must say that this is a first step that the Honorable Attorney General has taken. And I've listened to my colleagues. It made me feel good to hear them express their feeling. And that in due course, that these sentences can be adjusted and more awareness made of the perpetrators. Everyone in this house in the Cayman Islands know where I stand on these things, and God forbid if anyone was to trouble any of my grandchildren. May God have mercy on these Cayman Islands.
Does any other member wish to speak? Recognize the Minister for Education.
Madam Speaker, I rise to make a brief contribution in support of this bill. Madam Speaker, even though, as I said, the government is bringing this forward through the Honourable Attorney General, and considering the fact that we do have a number of bills still to get through in business of the House, I will certainly not speak to all that my heart is wanting to address in this bill, but certainly I believe it's important that I do lend my support on the floor of this House to what is attempting to be achieved through bringing this bill forward.
Honourable Minister, we've reached the hour of interruption. I recognise the Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 10-2 in order that the business of the House may continue beyond the hour of interruption.
The question is that Standing Order 10-2 be suspended to allow the House to continue beyond the hour of interruption. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, no. I believe the ayes have it. According to Standing Order 10-2 is suspended. I recognise the Honourable Minister for Education to continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And certainly, Madam Speaker, a number of the sentiments already expressed as it relates to this bill, I do concur with as well, and for fear of being repetition, will comment as necessary. But, Madam Speaker, I believe essentially the fundamental principle of what this bill is, especially as it relates to the part dealing with the sexual harm prevention orders, I will limit my comments to that particular section in the interest of time. The fundamental principle that the bill is trying to ensure that we look to do a better job at going forward is the obligation that we have as a country, as a community, as a government to protect our most vulnerable people. That includes, Madam Speaker, as we've heard, and as can be seen in the bill specifically, our children, our girls and boys, Madam Speaker, because our children are at risk in this regard. Madam Speaker, it also includes protecting our vulnerable populations in some of our elderly people, who we know, Madam Speaker, there are also instances where elder abuse, and in particular in the form of sexual abuse and sexual harm, is also a real concern and consideration. And Madam Speaker, it also recognizes the need to help to protect another very important vulnerable population in this country, and that is our disabled people in the community. And again, Madam Speaker, we know that persons who may be living with a disability in some form that makes them particularly vulnerable to such abuse certainly deserve and need the protection that such an order may provide. Madam Speaker, this order, or an order such as this, or mechanisms such as the sexual harm prevention order, is particularly critical and important and should absolutely be used where necessary, either in cases of confirmed or suspected through being charged, as can be seen from the bill allowing the interim orders to be made, especially where persons who are either confirmed to have been perpetrators or charged to have been perpetrators are in positions of trust, Madam Speaker. Family members, teachers, pastors, coaches, youth workers, and the like. Anyone, Madam Speaker, that has the ability to develop community workers, to develop a level of trust with the victims, Madam Speaker, it is absolutely critical that we try to identify and, where necessary, put whatever mechanisms are in place to prevent either ongoing or potential future harm. Because, Madam Speaker, make no mistake, sexual harm, sexual abuse, sexual predator behavior is a scourge in our community. And it has been for a very long time. This is not a today's concern. This is not even a yesterday's concern. This is a many decades, many generations, many instances where we have seen and we are today dealing with the effects of this scourge in our community. And Madam Speaker, it cuts across all socioeconomic positions. It cuts across all classes, color, races, or creed. Madam Speaker, I believe that this law is certainly one step in the right direction to ensuring that once someone is found guilty or once someone that has been suspected to the point of being charged and it is determined to be necessary for the protection of either the vulnerable children or other persons that I mentioned earlier, that such action can be taken swiftly to prevent the behavior from happening again or those individuals perpetrating in the future. Madam Speaker, this bill defines sexual harm as meaning physical or psychological harm caused by a person committing a sexual offense. And Madam Speaker, the physical harm, well, that's obvious. It is deplorable to think about some of the instances that we read about, that some of us may have even borne witness to, have heard about, as it relates to the physical scarring, the physical trauma that is often a result of such behavior. But Madam Speaker, the one thing that I think that this bill does that I agree with, it identifies specifically the psychological harm that is often as damaging, if not more damaging, than the physical harm that may or may not have been inflicted. Because, Madam Speaker, whereas most, but not all, wounds heal, psychological scars can scar for life. And you or I or anyone in this room may not even be aware of the damage that it has inflicted on someone that may have experienced such trauma. So, and for example, Madam Speaker, the sexualization of our young children, our young girls, and our young boys at an early age often leads to sexualized teens, to sexualize young adults, and to a system where that is how they were groomed. We've heard that term used before in this chamber in relation to this bill and some of the ills in relation to sexual harm. So that is their norm, Madam Speaker. So to ask and to expect that children who may be exposed and who may be subjected to this type of abuse, expecting them to know anything different or to do anything different, is in many instances maybe expecting, as they say, to squeeze blood out of stone. Now, Madam Speaker, I am certainly not here to justify in any way the behaviors that may happen or that may occur as a result, but it is a fact, Madam Speaker, that exposing our children to inappropriate images, inappropriate television at all levels, Madam Speaker, exposing them to pornography or other sexually deviant behavior that is completely inappropriate for their age, stature, and exposure, this often leads to dysfunctional relationships to dysfunctional views about what is normal, what is acceptable, what is expected, it often leads to the inability for people to form relationships. And Madam Speaker, I go back to the issue of, especially if the perpetrators of such heinous crimes are in positions of trust, it could shatter the ability for people to ever form relationships involving trust, because their trust has been broken in such a way, unless they have had the ability to have some form of intervention through counseling in whatever form to heal those psychological wounds. That is something that can continue with them and have dire consequences and manifestations throughout their entire life. And Madam Speaker, if I'm not mistaken, I recall there was a recent report from the WHO that clearly outlines some of the statistics, some of the indications of the levels of incidents of sexual abuse in the Caribbean. And unfortunately, I don't have the stats to hand to refer to right now, but it is something that we know, as I said, exists today, and it has existed for quite some time. And Madam Speaker, I think the important thing when we talk about how do we address the problem, and even though, Madam Speaker, this bill is not the panacea, this bill isn't the one-size-fits-all solution to this issue, it certainly goes a step in the right direction to bring about something that will help in dealing with the perpetrators going forward. But Madam Speaker, we can never, ever, ever lose sight of the fact that today's victims of sexual abuse often become tomorrow's perpetrators of sexual abuse. Today's victims of sexual crimes often become tomorrow's enablers of sexual crimes. And so, Madam Speaker, some members before me spoke to the need of ensuring there is adequate rehabilitation that is somehow coupled with the issuance of the sexual prevention order. And Madam Speaker, I would certainly agree with those sentiments because, Madam Speaker, I believe that the perpetrators of sexual crimes, as I said, given in many, many instances they themselves were once victims of the same crimes that they may be perpetrating or worse, they should be required to attend counseling, to attend treatment, to attend intervention programs specifically geared to help them overcome and break whatever cycle they find themselves in as a result of their experiences. Similar, Madam Speaker, to what I understand to be the conditions attached to drug court orders or, other type of rehabilitation and prevention orders that the courts now have the ability to give as opposed to strictly incarceration. Because again, Madam Speaker, I believe that adequate rehabilitation provisions such as counseling and other forms of treatment that would be required to help to arrest the incidents, the scourge in this community, as I talked about, it is absolutely critical that these provisions are made available to help these offenders who themselves may be within the grip of these offending behavior because of their life experience, because of their norm, because of the fact that they did not have the benefit of getting the help, and because they didn't have possibly the benefit of having such a prevention order in place at a time that could have prevented the action happening or the incidents happening to them. So, Madam Speaker, as I said, it is certainly a very complex situation and we need to look at it from all angles, but we need to ensure that those who are offenders are appropriately dealt with in a way that ensures that they do not in turn destroy the lives of other children and vulnerable people in this community. And one way to do that is to address it through tying the order to the requirement for rehabilitation in that regard. Madam Speaker, another key way to address the problem that, as I said, if we are honest with ourselves, has existed in this community for a very long time, and that is how we raise our children. We have an obligation, Madam Speaker, as parents, as grandparents, as guardians, as uncles, aunts, concerned family members, we have an obligation to raise healthy, confident children who have the greatest chance for success in the future. Madam Speaker, no matter how the child got here, the child didn't ask to be born, but that child is your child. It is my child, it is our child. We have an obligation to ensure, especially as parents, that we do all we can to provide that foundation for success. And one of the greatest ways we can do that is to ensure that that child is given and is nurtured with love, support, and is given the tools to speak out and feel empowered enough to defend themselves if necessary. And I don't mean necessarily in a physical way, because we know that there's power dynamics that are at play, especially if the perpetrators are much older and, as I said, in positions of trust. But, Madam Speaker, one of the best ways to achieve this prevention is better than cure mantra that I agree with in this regard is to help our children understand from the earliest age possible what is right and what is wrong, what is inappropriate touching, what is inappropriate behavior versus what is appropriate behavior and appropriate interaction. Madam Speaker, the worst thing that you can do for a child is to train them to keep secrets. Because, Madam Speaker, one of the reasons this is a scourge in our community is because it was never addressed openly and publicly for many, many years. And it is a situation where oftentimes the victims are told, you better not tell anybody because you're going to get in trouble. Or it is your fault why this is happening. You shouldn't have done this. The victim blaming that goes on is one of the reasons, and the shame that goes along with that is one of the reasons why today in 2017 we are still dealing with this issue in this way. And as one of the members indicated that it seems like there is an increasing incidence. Madam Speaker, I have to question whether or not that is the case in terms of fact. As the member did say, it either could be an increasing incidents being reported, increasing incidents being convicted. But Madam Speaker, I would be very surprised to say that it was an increasing incidence of those situations happening. Because, Madam Speaker, for so long, for too long, this has been one of those things that was kept behind closed doors. And if we teach our children to keep secrets, unfortunately, that is exactly what is going to continue. And as I said, as a parent, Madam Speaker, the worst thing you can do is to tell your child to keep secrets from other parents or other family members. Your child should be confident enough to know that they can come to you with whatever is happening in their life, and that you won't shun them or you won't make them feel less of a person because they're sharing this information. As difficult as this information may be to hear, you as a parent, you need to know. You need to know what is happening in your child's life at every stage of their life. Madam Speaker, I pray over my son every night, and I give thanks to the Lord for the relationship that I have with him. And I raise him to be able to come to me with everything. And sometimes he comes with me with some details that I'm like, oh my goodness. I'm not sure if I really wanted to hear all of this in such detail. But, Madam Speaker, I give thanks to know that he knows that no matter what he tells me, I will love him and I will do all I can to protect him. And therefore, Madam Speaker, I pray every night that that continues, that relationship continues, because if, God forbid, he is ever in a situation, because, Madam Speaker, as parents, we cannot be with our children 24/7. No matter how much we work to protect and provide for, they will be exposed. And sometimes they will be exposed to things that you wish they weren't exposed to. But, Madam Speaker, if we train our children to be open and honest with us as parents, then the chances of identifying those signs early, the chances of putting in those preventative measures, of making those reports that need to be made to the police, to DCFS, to whomever needs to know to be able to take action, those will happen much sooner and hopefully prevent any further harm that may occur with not having that level of disclosure or trust with your children. So, Madam Speaker, again, as things were talked about during this debate, we as parents, we have to be vigilant. And we have to monitor what our children watch, what they listen to, what they read on electronic media or otherwise, because they are bombarded with information. They are bombarded with images and imagery that are sometimes far above their mental capacity. And as adults, as parents, as guardians, we are the ones responsible to ensure that they are not exposed beyond their years. Madam Speaker, as I said, I am mindful of the time. I'm mindful of the fact that we need to get through. But, Madam Speaker, this is something that I have felt very strongly for a very long time. And I believe, Madam Speaker, that, as I said, I support this bill. I think this is a step in the right direction. It will hopefully achieve some of what is intended as it relates to ensuring that persons who may either be found to be perpetrators or suspected to be perpetrators, that appropriate action is taken to prevent any further harm being done. But, Madam Speaker, there needs to be some mechanism where the relevant agencies required by law, and also those who play a legitimate role and recognized role in the community as looking after the welfare of our children, there needs to be some mechanism where you can have appropriate access to the information contained in the sexual harm prevention orders. Madam Speaker, we saw just yesterday the launch of the MASH, the Multi-Agency Support Hub unit that brings together some critical agencies in the child protection sphere in our country, that of DCFS, the RCIPS, and Health Services Authority. And Madam Speaker, I do hope that that agency will continue to evolve to ensure that there is appropriate representation from the Department of Education Services as well. Because, Madam Speaker, agencies that are charged with the responsibility of the welfare of our children need to be able to access the appropriate information at the appropriate level in order to ensure that they are themselves carrying out their obligations under the law. And so, Madam Speaker, as I said, there are other organizations, civic organizations such as the Cayman Islands Red Cross, which many of us know have an initiative known as the Seal of Protection Initiative, which, Madam Speaker, is an initiative which aims to identify, verify, and recognize the other community organizations, sports organizations, youth organizations, and institutions that are putting in place the necessary safety measures for the protection of our children, including appropriate screening and hiring practices, written policies, and procedures on child protection. So, Madam Speaker, there are other organizations or other players in the community that also may need to have some level of appropriate information sharing to ensure that they're able to carry out the mandate that they've taken on as well. So again, Madam Speaker, again, what that level of appropriate disclosure is, I will refrain from giving my views on that at this point, but I certainly believe that we need to have making sure that all of the agencies in this community working towards the same goal of safeguarding our children and giving them the best opportunities for success and for a healthy, happy, and prosperous life are working in tandem with one another and able to share from the information that is gathered and also is aware of the types of mechanisms that are being put in place to prevent harm that may come as a result of not necessarily having the information as necessary. So, Madam Speaker, with those sentiments, I, as I said, support this bill, and I look forward to working with the government to see what can be done to ensure that our children are not just our future in name, because they're not. Our children are today. And as I said, today's victims become future perpetrators. And the best way to arrest this scourge in our community is to get that victim number down to 0. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Final call. I recognize the Honorable Minister responsible for Community Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, one thing I've learned recently is that the shortest bills tend to attract the longest debates. But this bill being brought by the Attorney General is a very important spoke in the wheel of child protection in this country. Madam Speaker, when we talk about sexual abuse, and sadly we see far too much of it in our society today. We hear of the cases before the courts, and we usually end up with two victims, the one who has perpetrated the crime and the one who's the victim. And as the Minister of Education just said, my colleague, she said that the cycle of abuse is what we are trying to break, because usually those who have been victims go on to become perpetrators. Madam Speaker, today is International Social Worker Day. In fact, I went over and had lunch with our Department of Children and Family Services, and just to tell them thanks for all the work that they do. It'll make your hair curl. Those of us who have been involved, we
We have the first elected member from Borden Town, the leader of the opposition, and the premier for a short time, who've been involved with being the minister of social services. I don't remember if the member from Northside, yes? We know the horror stories, Madam Speaker. Sometimes sometimes I'm glad when they don't even tell me some. It's that bad, because certainly you can't keep up with all the cases. But we do have serious issues in the small community. I've just launched a child abuse prevention policy, as members will know, and that seeks to monitor and to have child protection officers in place with sporting organizations initially, but to go way beyond that. That's as it were a pilot program, but to get all of our sporting associations signed up under that policy, and for us to report any suspicions of abuse. Madam Speaker, I too, like the fifth elected member from Georgetown, I support a closed register of perpetrators. I think that we need to know who these people are in this country. In a small community, it is difficult to have a public register, and I understand the concerns and why it hasn't been done to date. But certainly someone needs to know who these people are and what is being done and where they are going and the monitoring that should be taking place in regards to them. Because, Madam Speaker, our vulnerable, our children, our elderly, our disabled are the treasures of our society. Our children are our future. I don't know if this is some sort of divine happening, but by chance, last night, I was watching TV as I do late, and I've never ever watched the Dr. Oz, my namesake show. But I flicking through the channels, and I happened to come across it, and something caught my attention. Well, it was because it was sports. It was to do with sports, and he had sat with him one of the former members of the U.S. national gymnastic team, now a grown woman. And I started to watch it, and it got more and more interesting because and this is unfolding, I guess, as I speak, but there's huge allegations concerning the masseuse of that team and the people who led that team, because the way that these young ladies were kept on a farm, as it were, protected, looked after, as we know that to become the very best gymnast in the world, you pretty much give up your regular life and you're trained in a very closed environment. And he went on to bring not just the one that he was speaking to, but they brought on at least 3 other now grown women who were part of that. And these are medalists, these are Olympic medalists, Madam Speaker. And it got where it was almost unbelievable what I was hearing, because this masseuse who had access to them had gained so much trust in these young people, 14, 15, 16-year-old young ladies, that he was able to have free access to their rooms, free access alone time, a male with young females, and he was doing what he called treatment, when in fact it was gross violation of their bodies, of their young minds. The ironic part about that was, and this was the part that blew me away, was that he was the person that they trusted the most, because they didn't trust the people that had overall care for them, because they felt that they were mean and nasty. And this man had won over their trust and then proceeded to be a perpetrator of sexual violence against them. Madam Speaker, that hurt listening to it, because the pain in these now grown women, mothers, wives, was obvious. They were ashamed. They were reliving this thing. And this man, well, the investigation has started. I think he might even be charged or whatever. I'm not sure about all that part. But they did show him, and you could see that he had on his prison fatigues or whatever. But, Madam Speaker, this is a huge, huge damage to the psyche of these women. And they have to be praised for stepping forward and sharing this story and basically opening up themselves to the world for what happened to them. But I say all that just to say that we don't know the sexual predators in our community. We don't know who they are. They don't, as I said when I was launching the policy, the child abuse prevention, they don't come with a label on their heads. They don't come with a card to give you a business card. They are the people in community that gain your trust in the most intimate ways, and oftentimes turn out to be the biggest criminals and violators of the good human among us. So, Madam Speaker, this bill, as I said, is a valuable amendment to the penal code, because we have to tackle this from every direction that we can. And what I'd like to just throw a couple of questions, if I may, at the Honorable Attorney General, and maybe we'll talk offline afterwards, but just to find out where exactly does the DCFS, because I don't see them really mentioned in here, but where do they fit into what we're trying to do here? How will the orders be enforced? Who will actually be consulted on the conditions that have been imposed, and the monitoring of breaches and that type of stuff? I'd probably like to hear a little more about that, and what thought has been put into that, and if it's in the bill, well, I may have missed it. But we have to take this very serious, Madam Speaker. It is a small amendment to a big piece of legislation, but it is a very important one. We are right now in the middle of International Women's Month. Comes at a very appropriate time. As I said, today is International Social Workers Day. And we have a lot of people in our community that are working hard, many stakeholders working hard to prevent and to protect our vulnerable. So I want to commend, I don't want to drag this out, a lot has been said, a lot of good stuff has been said about this in the debates. And Madam Speaker, I want to offer my full support as the Minister in charge of Community Affairs and our youth in particular. I feel, Madam Speaker, that we need to take the brave step. We need to go as far as legalizing certain protection mechanisms for our women. This was brought to this Legislative Assembly before, and I think for some reason it did not go on to become fully legal, but our young ladies, our women, need protection. I see where we have community efforts with protection, with martial arts and all that, but I'm willing to go and say further on the floor of this House, Madam Speaker, that things like pepper spray and other items that women, certain alarms, or well, that wouldn't need any special permission, but certainly something in the form of pepper spray or any other kind of protection mechanism should be sought. And if we get back here after, certainly we won't be able to do it in this term, Madam Speaker, but if we back here as the government after the elections, I hope that will be something that we will see coming to legalize for the benefit and the protection of any one of us who have women in our family, who have young daughters or grown daughters, whatever the case may be, and have our wives and mothers. We know what's out there, Madam Speaker, and we cannot do enough in this area to protect. And I'm very happy that this piece of legislation has found its way to the floor of this Honorable House. And I certainly will continue to fight for the rights of the most vulnerable in our community. I thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Final call. Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I'll recognize the mover of the bill to respond.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I just want to make it quite clear that I had no intention of misleading the House when I said to you that it was a very short bill. The government is understandably very grateful for the very spirited and passionate debate and what is clearly an extremely important subject matter, as evidenced by the sentiments and the sincerity of all members, Madam Speaker, who spoke on this matter, and those who haven't spoken but are fully behind the initiatives that are being pursued here, as evidence in this bill, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, a number of things have been said, and I unfortunately will not be able to understandably provide an answer to all of them this evening, but I do give an undertaking, Madam Speaker, that this, as one member said, the Honorable Minister of Education mentioned that this is a first step, and the Honorable Member from Borden Town as well, first elected member from Borden Town mentioned that this is a first step going forward to address this and related issues, Madam Speaker. The point I'm making here is that I certainly give an undertaking to continue to engage with members and with stakeholders on behalf of the government to ensure that the ideas put forward are taken on board and somehow implemented to strengthen, Madam Speaker, the framework as it relates to the protection of our very vulnerable in the society, including our children. Madam Speaker, it was mentioned that there is a need to have in place a mechanism for monitoring persons who are subject to such an order. And it is accepted, Madam Speaker, and when we were developing this bill, it was agreed, certainly, that there would be need to put in place some sort of a structure, an arrangement to have the capabilities to monitor compliance with any such orders, Madam Speaker. What we also agreed is that it was not necessary to include all the details in the amendment bill to the penal code, but certainly other legislative underpinning, secondary legislative underpinning, and rules as provided for by the provision in this bill will be developed, Madam Speaker, to help to coordinate the workings of these orders, including the monitoring to ensure compliance and the necessary networking, if you will, among the relevant agents and the relevant stakeholders, Madam Speaker. The Honorable Minister of Education also referenced the MASH that was rolled out or unveiled yesterday, Madam Speaker. That's the Child Multi-Agency Child Safeguard Hub, which consists of, among others, the Family Support Unit, the DCFS, HSA, police, and so on. Madam Speaker, there are also provisions in the children law which impose certain obligations, notification obligations on certain individuals. And there are other initiatives, a confluence of initiatives, if I might say so, that are being pursued that will ensure that this order, this sort of one additional order or step or framework work in a way that it is intended, which is again to provide adequate safeguards for those who we took an oath to protect, Madam Speaker. So this is just but one other additional step being taken by the government, Madam Speaker, in ensuring that these predators, pedophiles, are in fact held to account and are monitored in the right way. Madam Speaker, the Honorable Minister of Sports also inquired about where the DCFS fits into this equation, which is understandably a very relevant question given the nature of the work pursued by level of responsibility for that agency. Madam Speaker, 45(1)(a), or clause 45(1)(a) says, Director of Public Prosecutions after consultation with Royal Cayman Police Service or any other relevant agency. Madam Speaker, I can confirm to the Minister that when the bill was being developed, the role of DCFS and others were discussed. And rather than attempting to list all agencies, we simply refer to them as other relevant agencies. But again, the relevant MOUs and other sort of protocols will be put in place to ensure the necessary synergy, Madam Speaker, with all the relevant agencies and all the relevant persons. So there will be monitoring of the breaches, there will be interagency coordination, there will be the relevant discussions among individuals and agencies. Grand Court rules will be developed, as the bill mentioned. I think the bill mentioned at clause 45F, rules of court to be developed by the Grand Court to help to, again, undergird the workings of the provision, Madam Speaker, and make sure that it delivers. So, Madam Speaker, the Honorable, I think the member from, the fifth elected member from Georgetown also mentioned the need for necessary monitoring, and I certainly agree, as I said before, that there will be arrangements put in place once this bill is rolled out to, and before it is fully promulgated, brought into effect, to ensure that the necessary monitoring mechanism is in place to give effect to it. I also agree with Madam Speaker that there is going to be need for international cooperation to ensure that, persons trafficking across borders, then some sort of a monitoring mechanism that can be put in place to alert, if you will, those who need to know of these sort of persons within the community. And so, I heard the discussion about the register, the closed register, and I think given what we have seen in recent times, Madam Speaker, it is clearly something that now needs to be taken on board. If it is going to be a closed register, then clearly a registry, then clearly it's something that can be dealt with in a way that is proportionate, given the rights of just everybody involved, including the victim and those who are going to be the subject of such an order. And I say the rights of those who are going to be subject of an order, Madam Speaker, because during the discussion I was looking at some of these cases from the UK where this provision is in place. And there's no shortage of litigation, Madam Speaker, about persons going to court and challenging some of the conditions in the orders in terms of their proportionality. And in some cases, the court have ruled clearly that the orders are necessary. In some instances, the court have clawed back and some of the orders that have been made. I'll water them now. So the courts are extremely vigilant in ensuring that whatever is done, Madam Speaker, that the right balance is struck and so on. And we here, being a country of rule of law, are anxious, understandably, to protect the victims, ladies, children, young, male, female, whoever, but at the same time ensuring that we don't run afoul of the law, Madam Speaker. Given all that have been said, Madam Speaker, it would be extremely difficult for me to try and traverse just about all the points raised, but I want to assure all honorable members again that I intend to discuss with all relevant agencies and parties, including the police, the DPP's office, the relevant agencies, the Grand Court Rules Committee, all the points that have been raised here, and see how best we can take these on board and ensure that the orders worked in a way that is contemplated by this honorable House and all the members here and all those who conceptualized it in the first place. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Penal Code Amendment Bill 2017 be given a second reading. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, no. The ayes have it. The Penal Code Amendment Bill 2017 has been given a second reading.
The Data Protection Bill 2016.
Recognize the Honorable Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, thank you. Madam Speaker, I beg to move for the second reading of a bill for a law to provide for the protection of personal data and for incidental and connected purposes.
The bill has been duly moved. As the Honorable Attorney General wishes to speak thereto.
Yes, Madam Speaker. And, Madam Speaker, this bill seeks to introduce a legislative framework in the Cayman Islands for data protection. I'm sorry, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, data protection is aimed principally at protecting the privacy and personal information of individuals, and in particular, Madam Speaker, regulating the collection, storage, processing, and the dissemination of personal data, and thereby safeguarding the rights to privacy in relation to such data, while at the same time ensuring that certain essential exceptions are allowed. Madam Speaker, consideration has been given to, among other things, Section 9 of the Bill of Rights in our Constitution relating to private and family life, as well as other rights under the current bill itself, the Data Protection Bill. Madam Speaker, for what it worth, we need to remind ourselves that personal data means data or information which relates to or identifies directly or indirectly an individual. It could include, Madam Speaker, general to highly confidential and sensitive information, including a person's health information or criminal antecedents. Accordingly, the basic premise here, Madam Speaker, is privacy and the right to one's own privacy. Individuals, employees, and customers expect that personal information will be, well, the handling of it will be respected and dealt with in a particular way, with adequate safeguards. It has been observed, Madam Speaker, that this has become more acute because of the increasing centralization of information through the computerization of various records and the large number of recent data loss and other breaches via online abuse, some of which has even led to suicide, especially among teenagers, Madam Speaker, due to sheer humiliation and hurt. Madam Speaker, in order to put this all in context, it would be helpful if I outline the internationally accepted principles of data protection, and which forms the basis, if you will, for this bill that is before this House. The basic data protection principles, Madam Speaker, these principles are to be found in Schedule 1 of the bill, page 42, for those who want to follow. And they contain some clarifications and exceptions, Madam Speaker, contained in Schedules 2 to 5. The principles start off, Madam Speaker, by acknowledging that personal data shall be processed fairly. Accordingly, personal data should only be obtained for specified lawful purposes and should not be used for further processed for any other purpose which is incompatible with the initial purpose for which it was gathered. In other words, Madam Speaker, if you collect a person's data for a particular purpose, it should only be used for that particular purpose, and when that purpose has been achieved, there is no need to retain the data or try to use it for any other objective. Madam Speaker, it also provides that the personal data that is collected must be adequate. It must be relevant and should not exceed the purpose for which it is collected. That is, you should only collect the amount of data that is actually needed for a particular purpose or transaction. No more, no less. Binds the crown. Binds the crown. The principles recognize that the personal data collected should always be accurate and current. That is, Madam Speaker, it should be up to date. Another important aspect of the principles is that the personal data collected or processed for a particular purpose should not be kept for any longer than is necessary for that particular purpose. So, Madam Speaker, if it is collected for a particular reason, it should be disposed of once that purpose is achieved. It should not be kept or retained indefinitely in circumstances where there is no further use for the data, Madam Speaker. The processing of any such data must be in accordance with the rights of the data subjects. That is, Madam Speaker, the person's rights are set out in the actual bill itself. It is also a requirement, Madam Speaker, that there should always be necessary safeguards in place for the handling of such data. Accordingly, there should be appropriate technical and organizational measures in place to guard against unauthorized or unlawful processing of personal data and against accidental loss, destruction of, or damage to such data. The data must be secure. And this is particularly important, again, Madam Speaker, in the age of iCloud computing or website usage, transferring of data across borders, or, Madam Speaker, as we know it, social networking. Finally, Madam Speaker, on the principles, the basic principles that is, the personal data should not be transferred to a country unless that country can ensure that adequate level of protection for the rights and freedoms of the data subject is in handling such data exists, Madam Speaker. This, by the way, is also the position in other countries where data from those countries may be required to be transferred to the Cayman Islands, Madam Speaker. There has to be what is called adequate level of data protection, and it needs to be on a reciprocal basis. Madam Speaker, for completeness, it may also be helpful to note that this bill also makes a distinction between personal data per se, which generally means any information relating to a person that may be used to identify an individual. An example, Madam Speaker, is the physical, genetic, or economical, cultural information. And it also makes a distinction about sensitive personal data, Madam Speaker, which generally refers to one ethnic or racial origin, a person's political opinion or religious belief, or their criminal antecedents, their sexual orientation or political affiliation, etc. It also relates, Madam Speaker, to the financial records, their physical or mental health, sorry, and as defined in the bill, Madam Speaker. I'm sorry. So, Madam Speaker, how did we get here? Madam Speaker, a data working group was established some years ago to research this particular law and tasked with drafting an appropriate bill for the Cayman Islands. It was comprised of various representatives from the public and private sectors, Madam Speaker. That group, as part of its recommendation, had recommended the inclusion of the EU data protection regulations which are relevant and applicable to our jurisdiction. During one of the consultation exercises, Madam Speaker, the Human Rights Commission, the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority, among others, offered comments on the proposed legal framework in this bill. Madam Speaker, I must say since then we have had numerous inputs from others, including the Bar Association, the Law Society, STEP, among others. But Madam Speaker, the working group was understandably very careful to ensure that this regime would not become too onerous on businesses, especially small businesses. Madam Speaker, when the presentation was done before to caucus, the current government caucus, and to Cabinet, Madam Speaker, the government also was concerned to ensure that whatever arrangements were put in place to give effect to a data protection framework would not prove unduly burdensome or onerous for businesses and especially small businesses, Madam Speaker. And therefore, the bill contains provisions that will enable the making of regulations which will be used to further clarify certain obligations, including how to mitigate any potential burden on certain businesses. These, Madam Speaker, would include, for example, being able to create certain exemptions from fees, certain exemptions from registrations, and other administrative requirements in instances when the risk is obviously low. The regulations will also be used, Madam Speaker, to provide or clarify other provisions, other workings, other applications, of the law. So, Madam Speaker, the government was very careful to ensure that the obligations are such that they can be complied with, but it is on a risk, it's informed by the level of risk that is involved. And in instances where the risk is very low, especially as it relates to small businesses, that the regulations be crafted in such a way to mitigate the burden of on small businesses, Madam Speaker, of complying with the provision of the data protection regime. Madam Speaker, this initiative is very noteworthy and timely in a number of respects. Indeed, the ICTA, until it is changed, has set up a cybersecurity response team in order to maintain cyber environment which will effectively encourages economic prosperity, Madam Speaker, while promoting such things as proper security and privacy. The passing of the proposed data protection law here would be a big step towards this aim, and it would support the Cayman Islands claim, Madam Speaker, that it is a safe place to do electronic business and that any data kept here will be secure. It will serve to encourage, perhaps, Madam Speaker, to safeguard properly the data passed over the various networks in the Cayman Islands, especially and ultimately it protects the information we hold, such as personal financial data, employee details, or third-party information, Madam Speaker. I must hasten to add, Madam Speaker, that some of the Crown dependencies, such as Jersey and Guernsey, have their data protection legislation in place some time ago. Bermuda has since enacted their data protection legislation. Madam Speaker, other places are moving ahead, Bahamas, Trinidad, among others, with data protection. We can't, Madam Speaker, to afford to be behind the curve on this area. Of course, Madam Speaker, we know that the UK have theirs in place a long time ago. I think it came into place since 2000, I think. We simply just need to look at some of the warnings attached to UK government emails. We receive them from time to time. And Madam Speaker, you will see where it says, among other things, that this email with attachment is intended for the attention of the addressees only. The FCO keeps and uses information in line with Data Protection Act 1998. Those are some of the warnings attached to emails that we receive from UK agencies, including FCO from time to time. It follows, Madam Speaker, as I said, that Cayman needs to put the sort of framework in place to ensure that we remain contemporary and be able to sell the jurisdiction as a place to do business, because your data in whatever form, in the Cayman Islands will be secure. So what of the bill, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, the bill is divided into 7 parts. Part 1 contains clauses 1 to 7 and deals with, among other things, the interpretation, the data protection principles, and the application of the data protection law itself. Clause 1 provides a short title on how the legislation will be brought into force. Madam Speaker, this includes, not in the bill, but for members' benefit, it will be a phased implementation, Madam Speaker, over 12 to 18 months period, similar to how the FOI law was rolled out. And in the interim, Madam Speaker, there will be a period for public education, as well as developing the necessary regulations and guidance with the required consultations from various industry stakeholders, as well as others who understandably will be impacted by this framework. So, Madam Speaker, it is important that we pass the law now so as to allow that process to be triggered. So over the next 12 to 18 months, in a similar fashion to the FOI law, we will have this, this work in progress and get to a stage where we can eventually implement the legislation. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Clause 2 contains the main definitions. And some of the key definitions or key terms there are personal data, data controller, as well as word processing. Clause 3, Madam Speaker, contain, I mentioned before, definition of sensitive personal data. I'm sorry. Madam Speaker, Clause 5, in conjunction with the schedule, defines the data protection principles, and I touched on those earlier in my presentation. But as a reminder, Madam Speaker, these principles include things such as 1, that personal data must be fairly and lawfully processed, that it must only be processed for limited and defined purposes. It must be adequate, it must be relevant and not excessive. The data must be accurate and up to date. It must not be kept for longer than is necessary. Madam Speaker, the data must be processed in line with the data subject's rights, and it must be kept secure. And finally, Madam Speaker, that the data should not be transferred to other countries without that other country being able to guarantee adequate protection of the data that's been transferred. Madam Speaker, I can tell you that when we were debating a number of the tax information exchange agreements, we had to give undertaking during the discussions that we were going to be enacting data protection legislation or similar sort of safeguard in order, Madam Speaker, to secure the agreements for some of these, secure consent, Madam Speaker, for some of these tax information exchange agreement. Madam Speaker, Clause 6 states that, Clause 6, I'm sorry, deals with to whom this legislation applies. Madam Speaker, it also applies to a data controller who, for the purpose of this law, Madam Speaker, means a person who alone or jointly with others determine the purpose and the condition and the means of processing the personal data that is established in the island. If the data are processed to the extent of that establishment, that means it has to be an establishment within the islands, Madam Speaker. It also applies to a data controller who is not established in the island, but processes data in the island otherwise than for the purpose of transit of the data through the Cayman Islands. Where a data controller is not established in the Cayman Islands, the data controller is required to nominate someone who is established in the islands as a representative. Translation, Madam Speaker, needs to be a representative in the island who is a data controller for the purposes of accountability. So it simply means that there must be someone within the island who is likely to, capable rather of being held accountable in the event that there is a breach of the data protection regime. Madam Speaker, Clause 7, as read with the definition of commissioner, contained in Clause 2, establishes the information commissioner, who it is contemplated will be appointed as the independent authority responsible for the administration, enforcement of the data protection regime. And I know members will say, well, there is an ombudsman bill now, which is going to be charged with that responsibility. The way the ombudsman bill is written, Madam Speaker, if I understand it correctly, it speaks to prescribed laws. And so at the appropriate time, the data protection law will be one of those laws, Madam Speaker, that will be added to the schedule of the ombudsman law, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Part 2 of the bill contains clauses 8 to 14 and deals with, among other things, the rights and responsibilities of the data subject, which for the purpose of the law means an identifiable living individual or a living individual who can be identified directly or indirectly by means reasonably likely to be used by the data controller and any other person. Clause 8 provides for the general right of access to data, subject, Madam Speaker, to some exceptions and conditions. A data controller is obligated to supply certain information to a data subject where that information relates to the data subject. Simply put, Madam Speaker, if someone collects data on you, personal information, you as a data subject needs to be able to be assured that the data that the person have on you is correct, is up to date, and, Madam Speaker, is not being used for any other purpose other than for which they hold that personal information or data about you. So those are some of the rights that, as a data subject, myself and everyone else enjoy, Madam Speaker. Part 3, Madam Speaker, of the bill contains clauses 15 and 16 and deal with restricted processing of personal data breaches. Clause 15 provides that Cabinet may, after consultation with the Commissioner, make regulations governing the types of data processing that requires the prior approval of the Commissioner. That is, Madam Speaker, processing that is likely to, among other things, cause substantial damage or distress to a data subject. Madam Speaker, Part 4 of the bill contains clauses 17 to 31 and deals with matters such as exemptions to certain general rules established in the legislation relating to data protection. The exemptions are based not just on the classification of the data, but on other criteria, Madam Speaker. An example includes the collection and transmission of certain data by entities such as SEMA, the Tax Information Exchange Authority, and which are to be exempted in certain respects given their regulatory mandate to cooperate with overseas counterparts, Madam Speaker. Exemptions that deals with the administration of justice, exemptions that deals with legal proceedings, exemptions that deals with combating organized crime, terrorism, drug trafficking, among other things, Madam Speaker. And some of the significant exemptions also relate to government fees and government duties, monitoring and inspection of regulatory function, as I mentioned, journalism, literature, legal proceedings, corporate finance, Clause 28, and legal professional privilege, Madam Speaker. Those are what we would call carve-out or exemptions to the general rule as it relates to the handling of personal data. Madam Speaker, Part 5 of the bill contains clauses 32 to 42 and contains provision relating to the function of the Information Commissioner. That office, as I mentioned earlier, Madam Speaker, is expected to be the oversight body or enforcer of the provisions of this law. The Commissioner will monitor and provide guidance on the application of the law, in addition to, and as I said earlier, being able to undertake enforcement action in appropriate cases, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I know some of those who were consulted expressed concerns about the level of the fine. There was $250,000 fine and so. But, Madam Speaker, I was looking at the European Union General Data Protection Regulation, and believe it or not, Madam Speaker, in their instances, the guideline and the regulation, has in provisions for the, a second, Madam Speaker, has in provision, Madam Speaker, for the supervisory authorities to have power to impose administrative fines of up to a maximum of 20 million euros, Madam Speaker, on data controller, or 4% rather of the data controller's total worldwide global turnover of the preceding financial year, whichever is higher. So it's 20 million euro, or 4% of the data controller or data processor's total worldwide global turnover of the preceding financial year, whichever is higher. Quite an exorbitant, a draconian, well, not draconian, but quite a hefty penalty, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Part 6 of the bill contains clauses 43 to 58 and deals, among other things, with the mechanics of enforcement, or the mechanism for enforcement, if you will, and includes a right to seek judicial review of decisions of the Commissioner, Madam Speaker, in the Grand Court, and as well as related matters, and thereby guaranteeing certain due process in any enforcement proceedings under this law by the Commissioner. Madam Speaker, this was an issue that the Human Rights Commission had some concerns about. They thought that the so-called summary power thing they described it, that was given to the Commissioner without adequate due process was not in keeping with our obligation to abide by the rule of law. So, Madam Speaker, provision has been inserted where an aggrieved person can seek judicial review of any decision taken by the Commissioner with which that person is aggrieved, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, while nobody supports wrongdoing, it is of utmost importance that people's professional and private data ought to enjoy proper safeguards in circumstances where they are involved in legitimate, lawful undertakings. But, Madam Speaker, subject, of course, to exceptions for the investigation and prosecution of crimes and regulatory transgressions. Madam Speaker, in this age of constant hacking and data mining, and in the wake of the advent of most recent historical and significant hacking and release of certain personal and commercial data, there are every good reasons, Madam Speaker, and justification to have proper data protection mechanism via the required legislative framework in place in the Cayman Islands. And by so doing, Madam Speaker, the jurisdiction will be able to assure persons who want to conduct legitimate commercial business here that we have internationally accepted standards of confidentiality. And that, Madam Speaker, should provide them with the necessary comfort. Madam Speaker, there are a number of legal imperatives for the Cayman Islands to enact a comprehensive data protection law. These include, Madam Speaker, that, as I mentioned to you earlier on, it was always contemplated that in dealing with some of our tax information exchange agreement partners, we undertook at the time that we would put in place the necessary reciprocal data protection framework. Madam Speaker, it was also envisaged that when the FOI law was rolled out, that there was going to be a complementary data protection law, Madam Speaker. Also, Madam Speaker, there is a current CCTV code of conduct in place which is used by government, and that assumes or at least contemplates, Madam Speaker, the existence of some overarching data protection legislation as well. Madam Speaker, we as a international, as a jurisdiction involved in international businesses, need to be able to provide comfort to those who seek to do business in and from our shores. Need to provide them with the comfort, Madam Speaker, that their data, commercial and personal or other data, where required, will be adequately protected, Madam Speaker, to the extent that the government is able to do so. We also have to make it quite clear to them, Madam Speaker, that like all other civilized countries, we do have exceptions for international cooperation where it can be established that there are offenses being committed, including, Madam Speaker, regulatory transgressions. This country provides no safe harbor for those, Madam Speaker, who are involved or wants to be involved in nefarious activities. That's not what data protection is all about. If you think that is what we are all about, Madam Speaker, then there's a wrong choice of jurisdiction to come here. Madam Speaker, the Postmaster General also advised us that the international customs and security obligations of the Cayman Islands Postal Service contemplates the existence of some sort of a data protection framework. Indeed, Madam Speaker, the Postal Service has two primary needs as it relates to data protection. One, there's a need to electronically exchange customs data with customs and postal authorities of other jurisdictions. And custom data, of course, includes names, addresses, and contact information for the sender and recipient of mail packages, as well as detailed information regarding the contents, the description, quantity, harmonized tariff code number, a country of origin, and value of weight for packages, Madam Speaker. The Post Office also needs the ability to enter into data exchange agreements, such as the agreement between the Cayman Islands Postal Service and the U.S. Postal Service, Madam Speaker. They need to have the ability to collect and store electronically or in paper form and report on data for mail items handled by the Post Office. These include the ability to allow customs to submit mail package information electronically, Madam Speaker, so that the Post Office can generate and print declarations on their behalf. And finally, Madam Speaker, in this regard, we can't forget that there's a Bill of Rights in the Cayman Islands Constitution, which imposes a positive obligation on the country to provide protection for an individual's private life, including persons' medical and other personal data, Madam Speaker. The government is required to put in place the appropriate framework, Madam Speaker, to guarantee such privacy. So, Madam Speaker, transition into a legislative data regime will not and should not be such a sea change for our major businesses and other entities, as they are already routinely involved in collecting, processing, and dissemination of significant amount of personal data on a day-to-day basis, Madam Speaker. This legislation merely seeks to serve to streamline the obligations that are necessary in dealing with such data, Madam Speaker. And so it is hoped that these provisions of the bill will offer the desired and intended protection of personal data in these islands. And I certainly wish, Madam Speaker, to commend the Data Protection Working Group, the Legislative Drafting Department, and all those who have contributed, Madam Speaker, to the creation of this bill. Those who have critiqued, some of the criticisms were quite helpful. Others, I think they were meant to be constructive, but not necessarily helpful. But nevertheless, Madam Speaker, it's a democracy. We took all of those on board, and the result is the bill before this honorable House today. And so, Madam Speaker, it has been quite a mouthful, but I certainly commend the Data Protection Bill 2016 for the consideration of this honorable House. I thank you.
We'll take the afternoon break now and reconvene at 6.
Madam Speaker, if I may, just out of turn, I'm sorry, just to apologize, to say that I have asked for some committee stage amendments to be circulated in respect to the bill. I'm sorry about that. I should have said that, sir. Thank you.
We'll take the afternoon break and reconvene at 6:30 p.m.